What the heck is this? It's an anomaly in the warp. A warp anomaly, a special episode from the 40K Fanatics. I'm Shane, and today I'm joined by the homie Connor. And we're going to be talking about Dungeons & Dragons. D&D, as people call it. Now, Connor, you have got some interest in 40K.
Yes.
You play the video games.
Yes.
If you won the lottery tomorrow, you'd have some armies.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, you'd pay somebody to paint them, and they'd be glorious.
Mm-hmm.
Right. I started this whole miniatures, let's call it a miniatures interest, miniatures experimentation. I started experimenting with plastic crack via D&D and role-playing games way back when everybody was running the D&D 3.5. And it was then that I became the all-the-time DM. And I imagine a lot of our 40K enthusiasts also have got a little bit of a cross-pollination with D&D. And so this is not, we don't plan on the Warp Anomaly episodes taking place of the regular weekly episodes unless we just can't get one in. They intend to be a bonus to sort of branch out into other areas, because we do talk a lot about other games, and there is probably no other game bigger than D&D. And it's going through, all of this stuff is having a resurgence right now, or I don't even know if it's a resurgence, but it's having a time in the sun, a golden age, if you will, of popularity. And D&D is probably a few years ahead of 40K in that there's been major motion picture releases, and it's totally mainstream, and you see it all the time in all manner of media, and that has not come without growing pains and controversy, which we could talk about at another time. But what I want to talk about today, and Connor, you have brought it with you, the new 2024 Player's Handbook. We're moving from 5th edition, the much beloved and often maligned 5th edition, into, well, what are we calling it?
I don't know. I've heard a lot of terms jumped around. New D&D was one of them. One D&D was, I think, what they toyed with for a while. Yeah,
they floated that up at the same time that they had their big dust up about the, what was it, OGL, the Open Gaming License.
Yeah.
And how they were trying to close that loophole, which that was such a moot thing. That got a lot of press and a lot of hate and sold a lot of copies of Pathfinder for what I and other legal analysts analysts on YouTube widely agree is not an actionable thing, because you cannot copyright a method of doing something, right? If I come up with a way to dig a hole with a shovel, I can share that with people and they'll be appreciative, but that's about the end of my money making with regard to it. The way that these companies get around that and are able to monetize their stuff is by, like, a Mind Flayer is a Dungeons and Dragons trademark construct.
Mm-hmm.
You can't have those and anything else. You can call them something else, but they need, at that point, you're into legally distinct things. In 40K, the demons, spelled with an A, are it.
Or the orcs with a K.
Yeah, the orcs with a K and the demons with an A.
And the space elves, the Eldar.
Yeah, the space elves and the dark elves, which got their own names.
Drukhari.
Yeah, that's strictly for being able to say, no, he can't say that. Anyway, let's get into it. The 2024 Player's Handbook. It's fresh, but it's also the same. What's changed?
They kept a lot of it the same. What I noticed, and what a lot of people online have been talking about, is a lot of it was primarily just a reorganization of information. So they've thrown a lot of stuff together, more organized, and so you can just kind of skim through the index and immediately know where to go.
It's really well organized in that way. Like that's not nothing. I tell you the other thing, it's way, way thicker. I have the last edition Player's Handbook over there. The new one, and I've seen the new Dungeons Master's Guide that's not out yet as of the time we're recording this. I haven't flipped through it, but it's also twice as thick as the last.
It's a doorstop.
Yeah, a big old doorstop. And yet, it's really easy to get through.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's huge. What else have they changed?
A lot of what they did was, there was some good and there was some bad. The main changes you're going to hear about are going to be to the classes. You'll hear that, they gutted Ranger.
Yeah, so I'm going to stop you right there, because the whole reason we came up with this idea to do this pod is that we were discussing the new 2024 Player's Handbook, and I have not found anything in it that I don't like. Now, how much D&D are you playing?
Right now, 4 games a week.
4 games a week is a lot.
Yeah.
A player in all of them?
A DM for one of them.
You DM for one of them. So I very seldom get to be player, and I'm always DM. And I like to think I'm a pretty good DM. I've studied it a good bit, and it's always been very obvious to me that what we're trying to do is be a team telling a story, not I'm the DM and you all have to beat me. Mm. Because as the DM, you're absolutely unassailable. You guys could have all the broken classes and characters that you want, and I can just be like, yeah, but more dragons show up. And so that's a non-starter. That's a game that is not worth playing.
Congrats, the Tarask has wings is always an option.
But you're not a big fan of some of these changes of the new one, and I am. So let's get into a little bit about what they changed. I love how they've made the backgrounds to your class, in my opinion, make sense as a thing that your character actually did.
I understand where you're coming from to a certain extent. But at the same time, I know one of the things I hated more than anything else about the new backgrounds. I wasn't a fan of the fact that they just handed out feats. But I can get into that later. The biggest thing I hated about the new backgrounds was that they changed originally, back in 2014 Player's Handbook.
Yeah. Let's give people what it used to be and what it is real quick. So used to, when you would make a class, you would pick a class and then you'd have a background, and the background would do...
The background was essentially just, if you're familiar with D&D, you'll know it was just, you get some skills, you get some equipment, and you get a cool roleplay thing that'll come in every now and then that's that. A lot of it was passive. Yeah,
it mechanically had almost nothing to do with your character. And your gripe about the new one. So the new one, something they changed that was somewhat controversial when it was being floated out was they took racial bonuses and they took the race aspect away in the new version. Rather than saying your race is an elf or an orc or a half elf or whatever, because that's become a little bit of a charged phrase. And also this new wealth of D&D playing folk tend to, they're the woke folk more often than not. And so they tend to be very sensitive as a group, and I'm obviously generalizing hugely here, about these kinds of things. And so they took that away. Because used to, if you were an elf, no matter what, you were +1 to your dexterity. They adjusted that with some expansion books where you could where it opened up the character creation a little bit. But your background was still just, well, I used to be a thief or something, some sort of a bandit or whatever. And they'd be like, well, you can have proficiency in lockpicking. It's like, well, I could have got that anyway. And so in the new one, they've swapped race out for species, which is kind of nice, which is where you pick up your dark vision and things. Stop me if I'm getting any of this wrong. But they've moved your core attribute adjustments to the backgrounds.
Yes. And
you dislike this because it can not synergize with class selection.
Yes.
Give me the example you gave. What was it, a bandit cleric?
Yeah. So, for example, if I wanted to be a criminal turned cleric, if I wanted to be, if I wanted to be a priest of Mask who's a god of thieves,
okay,
automatically I am going to be, statistically at least, weaker than the cleric who has always been an acolyte because I don't get to increase my wisdom.
Right.
I believe it's only dexterity, intelligence, or charisma for criminal.
Okay. And that makes perfect sense to me. Because if you were an acolyte who was studying from birth, some sort of youth academy, and your interests were in wisdom-focused study, then yeah, you're going to become a better cleric than the guy who was busy pickpocketing throughout his youth and early adulthood.
Well, the issue there is that then we get into the question of, okay, you can play the character you want, but I'm going to penalize you for it.
Yeah, but see, I'm not sure it's a penalty. Because what about the times when your cleric, lifetime cleric, needs to get through that locked door or needs to sneak past that guard, whereas the, what do they call criminal? The criminal cleric is like, I've seen this movie before. That's not nothing. And I think that's really cool because used to, you could say, oh, I'm a cleric who was a, whatever. And it meant nothing. You could have left them out and nobody would notice because a lot of times, how many times building characters in 5th edition did we sit there and pick our skill proficiencies and then have to go back because our background gave us one that we already picked. And so you don't want to double pick. So, you want to get as many as you can because why not? And it's like, well, it made no difference. You could have left it out entirely and you'd hardly notice.
I think a lot of that is anecdotal. Like for most DMs, for most players and DMs in general, your background feels very passive because either A, you forget, or B, it's very dependent on the campaign you're running. For example, if you're a soldier, and your character background thing is, oh, you are a member of this mercenary group or this army. If that army is on a different continent, then it's not really going to come up that much. But there are still ways to work it in.
Yeah, but now, if you were a soldier, you fight better than a guy who wasn't, which is not nothing. See, I think they've taken that very, very passive thing, because you're right. It's the most silly thing in 5th edition that we've done for years, which is, oh, well, I'm a such and such from wherever. And then it's like, all right, well, let me just put that in my notes here to give you, your story quest at some stage that has something vaguely to do with that. Whereas now, I feel the reminder of the background is ever present. And nothing's stopping you from picking one that synergizes with the class either.
Yeah. Well, I mean, as for the constant reminder, again, it can be anecdotal because it all depends on the player. Like if there will be some players who will never let you forget they were an orphan at birth and they will not stop talking about it.
Yeah, that kind of thing. that is a thing.
And then there are some who will say, "Oh yeah, no, I was like a god in my last life. But anyway, this is a cute bear."
Right, and so I'm a penguin now, and the background is. Yeah, it's funny the way that different players play, and I feel like you play a now. What is he? He's a half elf.
Yeah, he's a half elf.
In the campaign that I run, which we mean to play every Sunday, and we end up with every other Sunday on Roll20. Still playing 5th edition at this stage, but we're at some point we will either swap wholesale to 2024 or start a whole new thing. But you are a half elf barbarian who is an orphan raised by witches who has now turned into a werewolf. And who also has a fairly, not debilitating because he's real tough, drinking problem. And it's like that feels like it's a lot of stuff to say, but it isn't, because at any one time only one of those things can be coming up, and so it feels just very fleshed out. But I have seen it the other way, where it's my guy's depressed, and in every interaction, combat, social, walking around the camp, my guy's going to be mopey. It's like, that's a little bit of too much one note. But anyway, that's hardly got to do with the new 2024 book, they've changed some key spells. And they've changed some things with combat, and I'm a real big fan of that. Counterspell's the big one that has been changed hugely. We were looking at it the other night because I proclaimed for our campaign that we are going to use new counterspell rather than old one.
Mm-hmm.
And everybody's head exploded for a minute. And I want to get in more philosophically to that discussion of this idea that they've nerfed counterspell, because they have. Yeah. It's not as good as it used to be. But I've got a TED Talk on why I think that's good. Give us a rundown on what changed.
So Counterspell, for those unfamiliar, in the 5th edition version of Counterspell, essentially, if you see, dumbing it down a little bit, if you see a creature casting a spell within a certain distance, you can snap your fingers, and if you cast the spell at the same level they are, you say "f you" and their spell disappears. It's done.
Marking that for our edits at 1609.
Am I not allowed to?
No.
Oh, gotcha. Sorry. But anyway, it essentially just lets you say no to a spell. And there's no argument, there's no debate.
Yeah.
In the new one, however, when you are targeting that creature, it can make a con save. And if they save, then the counter spell fails and the spell goes on as normal.
Yeah, Constitution saving throw. So what happens now is big scary monsters either have a legendary action to automatically pass a save, in which case they will ignore your counterspell, or by the time you're high enough level to be really worried about big scary spells, then things are pretty good at passing Constitution saving throws. My counter to this is because we used to have these things called counterspell chains, because that's allowed. So big scary monster goes to cast their big scary spell. One player casts counterspell. Somebody else attempts to counterspell the counterspell. And we spend a whole lot of time to end up with nothing happening. And that is the beginning of my argument why this new version is better. Because I suppose you could counterspell the counterspell, but why would you? You'd be better off just to roll the con save and see what happens.
Well, the thing is, you're underestimating the power of spite.
I suppose. Well, here's my thing. Is that every single Magic user that could would take counterspell because they're always so scared of getting TPK'd, total party killed by, I don't know what, some ridiculous monster doing its big ridiculous thing. To which, as the DM, and I'm always the DM, so this is the way that I tend to think about these things. If I'm the DM and I'm casting a spell that is likely going to kill all of my players, counterspell doesn't need to be cast because I shouldn't be doing that. That's not a good game. Why are we doing this? Because I feel like, and I don't know, tell me your experience from the other games that you play. Is this a common thing that the DM is just like, oh, I got y'all? Because that is ridiculous.
I will admit there have been times where it feels like, okay, this feels a little targeted and this feels a little upsetty spaghetti. But then there have been times at the same time where I've had the opposite spectrum. For example, Thursdays, the game I play over in town.
Yeah, that's a friendly local game store adventures league situation. Which go look those up in your area if you're new to, or interested in D&D.
Yes, I've had a heck of a time. Anyway, we're playing that game, and in this setting, dangerous bugs come out in the middle of the night. If you travel at night, decent chance you're going to die. Well, we traveled at night because of some shenanigans. And we ended up fighting some big bugs. 2 members of the party went down within very, very quick amount of time. And the rest of us pretty much said, yeah, no, they have barely been touched by us. We just need to leave. There's no other way out of this.
Run away.
The old runaway tactic. Brave Sir Robin did indeed run away. And honestly, what ended up happening was the DM said, as you're running away, 3 random people you're never going to meet again just appear, completely decimate the bugs as if it's nothing, and then walk away or escort us to the nearest village, and then that's that. I personally, I don't know how everyone else at the table felt.
Hated that.
I despised it because we were given every warning on the face of the sun not to travel at night. We repeatedly, which I wasn't there for that session, but we repeatedly apparently did activities that got us kicked out of the local shelter, which got us out walking at night. So we kind of deserve that.
Yeah, I think that, like, let's talk a little bit just about DMing, because I think that, especially considering our audience is tabletop war gamers, where it's me against you, and the rules are designed for me to play against you and try to win a thing. Role-playing games and D&D especially is not that. That whole big rule book that you were holding is a set of guidelines to establish some level of sensibility and predictable order to the storytelling proceedings. And it's my job as DM, I believe, to cultivate you guys a challenging and rewarding experience. Sometimes it doesn't even have to be challenging. It can just be rewarding. It can just be some silly thing where nobody actually ends up losing any hit points, but you got to think your way out of it. Those are fun sessions to have. But going back to, the idea that if there's a monster that's going to cast a spell that is going to wipe the party, then that doesn't have anything to do with the potency of counterspell in the book. The DM should not have done that. Like, at that point, when I'm the player and those kinds of things happen, I am, depending on how the rest of the session's gone, right? But I tend to hold my hand up and be like, "Hey, objection, objection, Your Honor. What are we doing here? Because if we're just here for you to stomp us out, then why didn't you just do that literally anywhere, right? You guys wake up from your camp and there's a giant foot and it crushes you beneath it. A giant was walking by. The end. That's what you're doing.
Gorka Morka's foot descends.
Gork and or Mork's foot descends and you are all dead. Because that's what D&D is. You can just do that. And what? So my thing about the new counterspell and a lot of the changes in the book is that I think they've gone for it's more fun if stuff happens. Also, any DM worth his salt is bringing monsters to combats, because, let's talk about combat, because that's really what we're talking about. The spells hardly matter what they do outside of that, within some reason. But the DM should bring monsters that are appropriate to the party's ability, which is its own little bit of, experience and sort of, it's almost like cooking, right? It's like, I like this much salt, but the other guy may cook with more oils, right? But we both end up cooking good food, hopefully. And so I've noticed a thing. You guys in the game we play are all level 8, I believe.
Yes.
Fireballs are not killing you all anymore. They're just not. Half of you or more pass your dexterity saving throw, so you're going to take half damage. Some of you have got damage resistance to various things, and the fireball goes off, and it does 40 some odd damage maybe to one of you, and that's still not enough to knock everybody, to knock one of you, and then the others are out here like, it took 7. But damn it if it isn't fun every time the fireball goes off.
To be fair, usually I'm the only one that's okay after a fireball. Everyone else is kind of, Jesus, don't do that again.
Yeah, you missed some good stuff the last session. Connor's computer's been out, so he's missed a couple of sessions. One of which where the penguin wizard shot a magic missile at a bat that was watching, which turned out to be a vampire sorcerer that did wreck shop for a moment. But You mess around,
You find out.
that's it. I want to talk a little bit about the changes to combat and stuff, because I think they, again, did the same thing where it's more fun if more stuff happens. Change to surprise. Previously, surprise, you would... What would you do? You'd roll initiative, you'd determine who was surprised, and then there'd be a surprise round where those people just got skipped.
Yeah, essentially what it was is if your party is surprised, everyone who isn't surprised goes first. Everyone else gets skipped, and then the real, quote-unquote, combat starts.
Yeah. So now what they've done is they've taken what I think is the most elegant piece of carrot and stick that I've seen in any role-playing rule set. Advantage and disadvantage. Those of you that don't know, in 5th edition, was it 5th edition? They introduced advantage, disadvantage, or was that 4th?
I've only ever played 5th.
Nobody in the world played 4th. So many people just kept chugging along with open source 3.5 throughout 4th. Apparently, it was not good. Anyway, I'm just going to speak to the wholly uninitiated, and I don't believe there are any of them listening, unless they've lived under a rock their entire life. When you do anything in D&D, you roll a D20. In 5th edition, they introduced where if you had some sort of good situation, you could roll 2 D20 and take the highest. If you were in some way hindered, you would have disadvantage, and you would roll 2 D20 and have to take the lowest. All manner of things grant advantage and disadvantage, and the DM's discretion can say, if you're like, what if I swing from the chandelier and kick the guy in the chest? Can I have advantage? What with the swing? And I say, yeah, I'll let you have that. What we're not going to do is make sure that you're always swinging from chandeliers every single time you attack, but once or twice. It's a very easy way, without having to go through the book and say, well, let me go reference the rules, looking at you, Pathfinder, for swinging. So you take your weight and your swinging distance, and there's +3, provided you pass the requisite skill check to reach up and grab it. Like, that's not fun.
I've heard that about Pathfinder. It's just check after check after check.
It is, and it's a lot of modifiers, because it's more crunchy, and it's more rules as they're written, whereas that big old book you've got there, the Dungeons & Dragons 2024, is a lot more doing stuff.
A phrase I heard that I kind of liked was rulings over rules.
That's right. I like that. Yeah, because I can just decide, ooh, that sounds hard. Yeah, roll that with the disadvantage. And the thing is, it happens so often that nobody really argues with that. They're like, okay, that makes sense. Mm-hmm. Or, well, what if I do something to make it easier? And it's like, okay, roll it regular. Which keeps us from, it keeps us doing stuff rather than looking at stuff. And so the new surprise mechanic, I love, if you're surprised, rather than just get skipped, because getting skipped is not fun. You don't get to play when you get skipped. You roll initiative with disadvantage, which I don't think we've ever had that before. I don't know when anyone gets advantage on initiative.
There were very few cases. It had happened every now and then, but there were very few cases.
Yeah. So now, because the fun part about that is you could be surprised, roll 2 D20, have to take the lowest on your initiative roll. And you could roll 2 20s. And then you go first. Surprised and everything.
Gork says no.
Yeah, it's great. It's great. Just because stuff happens. I think, too, that once we get in and play it, going back to the backgrounds, I think that those non-synergistic background class interactions are probably going to come up a lot more than we think. Especially if you're playing the kind of campaign that I like to run where, first of all, I like to roll stats. I find that the D&D community loves to moan about the lack of balance in the game, the power creep of the player characters, the idea that the challenge rating of monsters doesn't add up to anything. I'm like, well, if you're doing point buy or standard array, you're right. Let everybody go out here and roll some 8s for some of their attributes, and you'll be surprised how quick it all falls into line.
I personally, I've made this abundant. I've made this clear to you. I am not the I don't hate it. I'm not the biggest fan of rolling for stats. Not because like, oh, I'm underpowered or anything like. It feels very like. For example, my original idea for Aestrin, which is the character I play in your game, was that he was going to be a paladin who was devoted to the forest and making sure everything stayed. What it ended up being was that his stats just didn't work, and I couldn't do a paladin with those stats, so I had to move things around to be a barbarian, which was honestly probably more fun for me than a paladin was. So it worked out in the end. But I will say, like, especially for Aiden's character, Granny Mogwin, who has negatives in everything but one ability score, there are pros and cons. And I think probably a lot of that could be solved with just changing how you roll the dice.
I don't think it has anything to do with that. I think that with hindsight, you probably would have been fine being a paladin with your crappy rolled stats. I think that people's expectations are often clouded by games that they've played before. I like being a player in D&D, but only if it's a really good DMing job. Because I really like being the DM because I'm quite an active participant in the whole thing. We play our sessions in an hour and a half and get tons done. I've played other sessions where you sit there for 6 hours and you travel from one town to the next. You've seen nothing. You've done nothing.
I've been in those too.
It's terrible.
Awful.
It's terrible. Or you get into some sort of dust up and they're like, well, the town guard doesn't like that, so they're going to put you in jail. And you just get so stuck in the mud. And unless you are surprisingly powerful to your DM, you kind of just get ground down to standing around talking about stuff, which I don't think is a lot of fun. But the granny character you talked about, who is a shape-changing dwarf druid, does not seem to be hampered at all by having all those negatives.
Well, to be fair, her stats change every time she morphs.
Right. I don't know. I just... My thing is, if you guys are all regular peasants, I would still be trying to cultivate an experience that would be challenging and rewarding. What we're not going to have is some sort of silly meat grinder. You know?
Yeah.
Because that's not fun. I don't know who's having fun like that, but there are a lot of people playing the game that way. Now, I've heard that the new DMG, I was watching a video, I can't remember what the YouTuber is called, but he's kind of fun. He doesn't put out videos unless they're sponsored. He's at that stage of his YouTube career where he's coming out with a video a month, if that. But he got a look at the new DMG, and they spend the whole first chapter just talking about the social contract and like what we're actually trying to do here, which I think was sorely lacking from the original DMG. And every time you see it on TV, the idea is lacking, because you always get these moments. Like the most famous one recently was the battle against Vecna in Stranger Things.
Oh yeah. And
it really, in that dramatization of it, of them playing the game, it's very much the players against the DM, which is just not the way it works. It can't. You can sort of pretend that's how it works from time to time, but I think that people get a really warped idea of what it is they're looking at. But anyway, back to the 2024 book. How would you have done it different? Because you don't like it.
I won't go so far as to say I don't like the book. I don't like some of the changes, because what I've noticed a lot of it was let's take Ranger, for example. I don't like the changes they made to Ranger. The main reason I don't like what they did to Ranger was, for those who don't know, in 5th edition, Ranger was notorious for being a little underpowered, and you didn't really know what the class was supposed to be. Because there were just so many mixed-matched features and traits. It was a whole thing. Anyway, One of the ways they tried to solve that was in a 5th edition supplement, which was Tasha's Cauldron of Everything, that gave a whole new list of optional traits. Also, coincidentally, the one that introduced your race no longer affects your ability scores. Anyway, when they did that, rather than just say, I like that they gave the player agency. They gave the player the choice of, okay, these are very passive features that are probably not going to come up. So here's the option to just say, hey, I want a more mechanical bonus from this feature. So you turn that feature off and you turn on, for example, what was it? Natural Explorer, which used to be just you know a few landscapes really well. Now, or at least for Tasha's, you get new walking speeds, you get some damage resistances occasionally. But in the 2024 Player's Handbook, they changed it to just, probably one of the ones I despised the most was, let me look and see if I can find it here, because I know it's here somewhere.
Now, see, I've always played a ranger every time I play D&D, and I've never felt like it was underpowered. And at a low level, it's probably overtuned because you stand way far away and shoot stuff, and that's a good way to do damage without getting killed. But also, I think it's probably just the DM in me that makes me always try to be like, well, I can probably track the monster wherever they've gone because I've got all that stuff. These are the things I'm good at. There's a small dog about to attack Connor. The wife is gesturing toward him vigorously. She's got him. He's up and he's out. Safe.
Successful.
So go ahead and you found the ranger spot in the book. It was very easy to find, and the art in the book should not go without notice. It is really something.
Art is fabulous.
Probably fabulous.
Best art I've seen in any D&D.
Incredible. They make you feel like you bought a thing.
They did.
Give Wizards, the community at large gives Wizards of the Coast a lot of stick for just being, a giant corporate monolith. But they make you feel like your $60 was well spent.
Oh yeah, definitely for that. Like, this is probably one of the few times I bought a D&D book and said, "Oh yeah, this was worth the money."
Well, I've got thoughts on that, by the way. It may be the last Player's Handbook you buy.
Possibly.
Go ahead.
I'll just go ahead and get it out. Like, probably the one thing that, as I'm reading the Ranger, immediately clued me in was favorite enemy, level 1. Biggest thing probably about Rangers that is recognizable from almost every Ranger is that they're good at fighting a particular kind of enemy. It's their big thing. It's their backstory, usually. It's everything. In this one, it's Hunter's Mark, which is a spell that deals some additional damage. Hunters usually got access to it in the previous edition. In this edition, you get to cast it. One moment. Yep, you can cast it twice without expending a spell slot. Feature over. That's all. Yeah,
so that's a new change that is more broad in the book. Is a lot of classes have got some of those little spells that you would get by being a class, looking at you, Thorn Whip and stuff like that. You just get to cast them for free.
Yes,
because used to the thing was that you wouldn't use them because you've got other spells that are more powerful. And so these little sort of class spells just get forgotten about. Now there's no penalty to using them. So I think we're going to see more of them. And that's also, I think, going to flavor the games much more than they used to. I'm not mad about the favorite enemy thing because without fail ever, it appeared the DMs that I would play with would see my favorite enemy and my natural explorer terrain. And they would say, okay, we're never going to see spiders and we're never going to go to the mountains. And I'm like,
that seems very toxic.
I mean, yeah, that's what I thought. I'm like, what? What are you doing? Like, stop it. Anyway. Yeah, I don't know. I'm going to have to see it. I am of the belief that there is no such thing as an underpowered character. I think that if somehow our game devolves into, you remember the old four-corner surround him and slash, right? If I ever have a combat that devolves into that, I am always quick to be like, okay, you got him, because that's no fun.
Yeah.
But there are people out here running whole games where they're. I think that the D&D modules, the books that have the campaigns, catch a little bit of heck for this too, because they only have so much room in the book to draw maps, and they got to give you this whole dungeon, right? And so you end up with a whole bunch of 5-foot wide hallways, and you're fighting. They expect you to fight 5 kobolds in that. And so you put the tank at the front, and then you say, I don't know what. The warlock spider climbs up on the ceiling, and then you've got 2 people just sort of fighting up front. It's ridiculous.
It's an actual meat grinder.
Yeah, it's a bad way to do it. And hey, guess what? Ranger, not very good indoors. Who would have thought? The guy with the bow. And here's how you know that it's not meant to work this way. So what I've started doing is, as we've been playing this game now, you're one of the newest additions to it, but we've been playing my Sunday game through 3 campaigns over 3 or 4 years now. And I've gone away from like dungeon crawl type maps, and I've gone to, they're still dungeon crawl. But when we fight something, I get sort of generic battle mat. So it's like, here's cave mat. And so you end up with a pretty big room or something. Maybe we'll just draw some lines in to say, so here's sort of the hallway, and then it opens up into something. There's rocks to hide behind. There's a cliff over here. The ceiling's 30 feet high, whatever. And then you fight. Because I find that is way, way, way more fun than you're in the 10-foot wide by 50-foot long corridor. There's nothing to hide behind. There's nothing to use. It's just you amongst the void, and there's some enemies. Hope nothing comes around the back corner and gets you. No, that's a terrible way to do it. If you guys ask me, are there stalagmites I can knock down? It's like, you know what? Maybe. Let me decide. Sure. See what you can do. Start shooting up at the ceiling. Hope you don't cave the whole thing in. That'd be upsetting. Way better way to do it. And here's how you know that's how it's supposed to go, is because the longbow short range is 150 feet. You want to shoot at 300 feet? You have the horrible penalty of doing it at disadvantage. Oh, but wait, if you're a ranger of like level 4,
it's a plus 14.
Yeah, you get like plus 9 to your shots. So guess what? You're still going to hit stuff. And then, of course, you can take sharpshooter feet and ignore that entirely. So 300-foot range. Yeah, this stuff was never built. The ranger class especially was never built to operate indoors, first of all, but certainly not indoors in like the traditional, Hero Quest dungeon crawl. That's silly. Now, with that, and therefore, the reason I don't think there's any such thing as an underpowered character is a halfling bard that rolled his stats, and they're all terrible, can hide behind a rock and sing songs the entire time and participate and lay traps and things like that and be like, guide him over to my snare that I laid out. That's a thing. And the DM should allow that to be without being like, oh, I'm going to kill the halfling right off because he's easy to kill. That's not fun. Stop that, bad DMs, and you know who you are. I'm talking right to them. They're like, ooh, I've done that. The last thing I want to talk about, we've got just a little bit of time left, is I don't think that you're going to buy another player's handbook for possibly ever. This is not 6th edition. I don't even think it's necessarily 5.5. I don't think we're going to do it that way. Because they told us that it's going to be compatible with the 5th edition stuff, because there are so many books out, so many third-party modules and settings and all this stuff. And when I was going through this new player's handbook, I was like, they really went and did it. They cooked. You can take anything from anywhere and just near enough plug it in and it will work. And it's not like we're not going to get a new Tasha's that's, 24 players handbook approved or whatever. I'm sure we'll get a new Curse of Strahd that's all tuned for 2024. But I think what they've done, and it's what they've been doing for a while quietly, except they were stuck just saying it's 5th edition, more 5th edition content. Here's more 5th edition. Now they've gotten rid of that, but it's a games as a service. It's Fortnite. It's DLC. It's Train Simulator 24, 25, 26 ad infinitum, right? What they've done, I think, and I think this is brilliant. Tell me if you disagree. They've come up with a system that is accessible enough that if you have never heard of a role-playing game ever, but someone said Dungeons and Dragons, and you're like, I've seen that on Big Bang Theory, you can pick this up and feel like you are in it.
Yeah.
It is not so complicated that you've got to read the entire book all at once, get your head around dice modification, the whole Pathfinder thing of a modification here and a mod there and a mod there, and to do all this math. It's none of that. It's, if you're a new DM and you don't know anything about fighting in water, you could just be like, swinging in water sounds hard. Disadvantage on all your attacks until you guys get out of the water. Okay. It's a great way to start, but I also think it's a really comfortable way to just be. And I think that that's what they've landed on. I think they've really distilled this down into a spot where the core rules are not going to change. I wouldn't be surprised that if in 3 or 4 years they put out a player's handbook and they call it like Player's Handbook 2, and it's another, how many classes are in that thing?
12?
12? Another 12. And another dozen species. Yeah, and by that point, we'll already have God knows how many backgrounds, and then it'll have even more. But what it'll also have is it'll have a bit of setting. Maybe it's a different chunk of the Forgotten Realms. Maybe it's all fey creatures or something, and it's all mystical because they've been doing that. Now they've got this whole multiverse thing. What's stopping them from doing a player's handbook? The core rules will be the same, but it'll have all this other stuff for not even necessarily a different setting, but it'll be like a reskin.
Yeah, variant rules setting.
Yeah. But then they'll be designed where you can just run them together too, which is what we've got right now, which is beautiful. Like we've got we've got Leland, the penguin. What's he called? He's the penguin man is a thing from the Spelljammer module. And
is it?
Yes, they're vaguely psychic. They can like do telepathy between them, and they're like a merchant people.
I'll be totally honest. I never saw them in Spelljammer, but it's been a while.
They're in there. They're in there. I don't think they were even featured in the campaign, but they're in like the lore, and there's monster stat blocks for them and things. And so we've got a character who is a penguin. And it's beautiful.
Slightly homicidal as well, but we don't. Yeah,
super homicidal. But what do you think? You think I'm right on that? You think we're going to see a 2027 edition with any meaningful changes? Because I just don't think we will.
I think it's too early to say, because from what I've heard of the Dungeon Master's Guide, and from what I've seen of the Dungeon Master's Guide, because I have seen little bits here and there, not nearly as much as you, but I have seen a little bit here and there. I think that the Dungeon Master's Guide is going to be probably the best they've come up with.
Yeah, because it's laid out like this player's handbook where whatever you need is easy to find.
It's also
not nothing.
It's also laid out in a way that like we know the game isn't perfect, but you understand the point of it. So here's the tools you need.
Yeah, and they let you in on the secret that the game's not perfect, which I think is huge. But that's why I say they've already shown, and look, all the same people that were so incensed about the open gaming license controversy because they're paying their rent on selling third-party modules and supplements to 5th edition. It's clear that 5th edition was able to have just an unlimited amount of stuff just bolted onto the side of it. Mm-hmm. Now I feel like that what they've done is set us up where they can bolt even more stuff on. And also, and this is probably why they looked into that open gaming license, and it doesn't even seem like they moved to shut anybody down, but it seemed like the lawyers got involved in looking at the possibility of there's a ton of people spending money on stuff to just bolt onto the side of this 5th edition game. What if we did that? We're doing a little bit of that. But what if that was just what we did?
It would be interesting, yeah.
And I think that's awesome because I don't want to learn a new rule set necessarily. I don't keep up very close with every single piece of what we got because little DM tip for you all you dungeon masters out there. You only need to know what is coming up in the game you're playing. If you don't have any paladins in your player group, don't worry about learning all the paladin rules. It's too much. You're trying to tell a coherent story. You're trying to do voices for NPCs. You're trying to build a piece of adventure while your party has decided to not do anything that you expected them to do for that session. You got too much going on. Let the players tell you what the heck the stuff is. Every time you guys cast a spell, what do I say?
It's been so long.
What's it do? Yeah, your guy's not casting very many spells these days. But I'm like, cool, what's it do? Now, we play in Roll20 where I've bought all of the 5th edition stuff, so it just pops up and it's lovely. But anyway, that's all the time we've got. That's been Connor. I'm Shane. This is 40K Fanatics, a Warp Anomaly where we're going to talk about other games in the tabletop gaming space and things like that. And who knows how often these will come out. Maybe we'll talk about more D&D. Let us know if you want to hear more of Connor's thoughts. There's nowhere to find him. He's just he's out on the internet toiling away in the Dungeons and Dragons content mines.
I'm just tending my garden. Praise Nurgle. Anyway.
We'll see you guys next time.